One of the hardest things for investors to do is to figure out how much they'll need to retire. I've done several videos about figuring out how much you need to retire, my very own formula, and I've taken you to my website to use the calculator and stepped you through that. I'll put a link in the description section to those videos so you can watch those. But in this video, I want to share with you 5 reasons it's so hard to plan for retirement, to plan on knowing how much you need to retire. And I'm also going to share with you solutions for each of these problems so that you can help overcome them. Okay, so the very first problem is that investment returns are not fixed, and it's impossible to know what sort of return you're going to get. We can't use those long-term averages because, well, they vary from year to year. Now, this is the case, of course, unless you're in some sort of fixed investment product, something like an annuity where you have a fixed return. But most investment products don't have a fixed return. So this makes it really hard to plan for how much you need for retirement. I've got some great solutions to overcome this problem, at least partially. Okay, so the very first thing to do is not to make assumptions. We just can't make assumptions that things will be the same during our retirement years that they have been up until the time that we were using to do our retirement planning. So that's the very first thing. It's just don't make assumptions about those returns. The second thing is don't count on the averages. We don't get averages. We don't get long-term averages. I get comments on my channel here, well, yeah, I get, 10% a year from stocks or 8% a year from stocks or this X amount. Yes, those are long-term averages over certain time frames, but that's not what you're going to get in real life every year you're in retirement. The returns are going to be different. The next thing you can do is avoid recency bias. We have this tendency to think that what has happened lately when it regards, well, our investments or really sort of anything is going to keep happening. It's recency bias. Avoid recency bias. We can't, going back to assumptions, make the assumption that's what has happened in the investment world or in the world period is going to keep happening over the next few years. The next thing you can do is be aware of valuations and the economic environment that's happening when you retire. Okay, so if we're in an environment where assets are very, very overpriced, most stocks are overpriced, bonds are overpriced, real estate is overpriced, then it's really smart to assume that those prices are going to have to drop back down to return to those average prices. That's just how things work. At any given time, you can say, are assets undervalued right now? Is the economy heading into a recession? Is the economy in a recession? Is the economy coming out of a recession? Is the economy going through a period of expansion? What's happening right now? And we can consider that with a, we're not economists, but we can factor in these things to have an idea of where we might be headed in the near term. Now, this can be a little bit tricky in thinking this through when it comes to your investing. I go through this in detail in my investment course, so if you want some help with this, check it out. I'll put a link to it in the description under this video. The next way to account for these inconsistent returns is to diversify so that you have some assets that will go up when other assets go down. And then the next thing that you can do is plan for drawdowns, not annual returns. We can easily get caught up in looking at those annual returns when we look at past performance data in planning for our financial future. But in reality, it's the drawdowns that really get us. That very high point in our investment returns all the way down to the bottom. So we might have that high point in, say, May, and then we start heading down, and then maybe we go through something like that for 18 months. But the annual returns might look okay, but the drawdown from that high point may not be okay. It may not be something that we can live with. So always consider the drawdowns, not just annual returns, when you're looking at past investment performance and figuring out what sort of return number to use in your planning for how much you need to retire. Okay, the next big problem that we're presented with in knowing how much we need to retire, what makes it so darn hard, is that inflation is unknown. We've seen it recently. I've talked about inflation here for a while. The long-term average inflation is about 3%. It was very, very low until it raised its ugly head recently. And inflation is just something that really, really hurts us in retirement, especially. So you'll want to, as a solution, factor inflation into your retirement plan by counting on increasing your cost of living every year for inflation. It's almost every single year that we have inflation, sometimes much worse than other years. And you'll also want to have investments that will increase with inflation. One of the worst investments for inflationary times are bonds. If you can imagine that you have this asset that pays you a fixed amount, then you're stuck with that amount. It's not adjusted for inflation, so you're going to lose purchasing power on that interest that you get from your bonds. So that's one of the worst things about bonds during inflationary periods. And then, of course, you'll just want to plan for the worst, but I always like to hope for the best because I think there's something to be said for being optimistic. The next reason it's so hard to plan for how much you'll need to retire is we don't know how long we're going to live. This is a really, really touchy subject, of course, right? We don't know how long we're going to live. Are we going to live into our 90s? Are we going to live into our 70s or 60s even? We don't know how long we'll live. All I can say for this is, as a solution, be pragmatic. Really remove yourself from the personal part of it, as hard as it may seem, and be very pragmatic in thinking this through when you're planning for your retirement. And then also take care of your body so that you live longer, but also take care of your finances so that you have enough money to live without stress. And that's how you can handle that uncertainty of not knowing how long you'll live. Okay, the next reason it's so hard to plan for how much we need to retire is that black swans occur. What is a black swan? It's a completely unexpected event that nobody could have planned. For example, the 9/11 tragedy was a black swan. The COVID shutdown was a black swan. So what can you do as a solution to black swans? Well, you can have a plan B, okay? And I love plan Bs anyway. I think we should all have them because things don't go as we planned. If you think about it, they just don't always go as we planned. And then the second thing you can do is diversify. Again, very important in investing. And then the next reason it's so hard to estimate how much you need to retire is because economic factors drive investment returns. So many people believe that it's about choosing the right stock or choosing the right financial advisor or choosing the right fund or choosing the right strategy. It's really about the economic factors because that's what drives our investment returns, more so than choosing the right individual security. So having an awareness of this is really the solution, just simply being aware of it and realizing that investment returns are, really for the most part out of your control. You do the best you can with what you've got, and then you have to just accept that the economic factors are going to drive those investment returns. They're going to influence it. And that's what makes it so hard to plan for how much you need to retire. Remember, retire certain.